I'm Lynn Fraser with the Kiloby Center for Recovery. I'm really excited to have with me today Dave Nadelberg. He does something called narrative breath work. He's also the originator of the Mortified podcast, which I'm sure some of you are familiar with. So Dave, why don't you just take it from here and tell us a little bit about yourself and what brought you to here?
Well, thank you, Lynn. I have been doing a project called Mortified for most of my adult career at this point, my adult life, I should say. I didn't really have a teenage career. I don't know why I said that. But I started Mortified about 16 years ago. And it's a project where adults share their most embarrassing childhood writings in front of total strangers. So things like the diary entries you wrote when you were 14, the love songs you wrote when you were 16 and thought you were the next great American singer, the poems you wrote, the plays you wrote, even the cartoons you drew, and home movies. So that's what we do in Mortified. People get up on stages all over the world and share them with total strangers. It's comedic, but it's also cathartic. And so it's a real mix. And so that began as a stage show, and now we run as a stage show with productions in about 20 cities worldwide. And we do a podcast, as you mentioned, called the Mortified Podcast. But we also do stuff for Netflix that you can find us on. We have a game coming out with Penguin Publishing in a year. And we have books. You can find books, and you can go to getmortified.com, find out about that.
Dear Diary.
Dear Journal.
September 13th.
July 29th.
I've never been attracted to a man in the way that I'm attracted to countless women. Maybe that means something.
When I got my period, my mom threw some maxi pads at me and she was like, here you go. Figure it out.
Dear Diary, my body is flat, ugly, and unpubicized. Thanks, Mom. Thanks, Dad. Thanks, God.
To me at that time, that was a deep, dark secret to hide.
Writing the diary, I think it did help in a lot of ways.
I had to learn to not give up, that I was someone that had a lot to give.
I'm sorry, I'm so nervous.
This is a secret journal, so get out before I bitch slap you.
So that's the mortified part of my life. But then there's this sort of other semi-secret side of my life, I feel, which is how you discovered me, which is breath work meditation, and sort of my spin on it, where I merge what I do in the world of storytelling, and I try to incorporate that a little bit into breath work, into a thing that I call narrative breath work, which can be found at narrativebreathwork.com. Yeah, so I'm the founder of Mortified, but occasionally I'm a performer in the show. In fact, I'm going to be in our London show in a week on October 26th. I don't know when this is running, but where I'll be reading aloud a love letter that started Mortified that I wrote when I was 15. But yeah, typically I am a host. I am a producer. I wear a lot of hats. Copywriter.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So I'm sure you've heard, there must be thousands of stories by now. Is there anything that comes to mind about addiction and recovery that kind of pops into your mind? What was going on with somebody?
Well, yeah, I mean, we've had lots of people, we cover the adolescent experience, and we cover it in a way that's very different from how you typically would see that portrayed in pop culture. So the adolescent experience in pop culture is usually written from the point of view of a man or a woman in their adult life, looking back. And so it's often with sarcasm or the wisdom of age. And in the case of Mortified, we're literally hearing the things people wrote when they were 13, 14, 15. And that could be a prom, getting rejected for prom, but it can also be, it can be addiction. It can be mental health things, a divorce, whatever a kid is experiencing, a divorce meaning their parents, but it's whatever a kid is experiencing. And we actually have an episode of our podcast, I think it's episode 99, called Mortified Interrupted, where two people, it's the diaries of two separate people who wind up in in mental hospitals for extended stays, and they keep diaries inside there. One of whom was actually in the same hospital that Sylvia Plath was in, and wrote the Bell Jar about. So, and then in terms of addiction, we've dealt with like kids who certainly partied too much. There's an episode called The Life of the Party. It's one of our earlier episodes. It's called Stacy, Life of the Party. And it's about this girl who's just like, she's like carefree and fun and all that. And eventually it does catch up with her, and we kind of get into that, the party ends. And then we were most maybe known for a piece we did with the radio series This American Life. We've done a few segments for This American Life, but one of them is with a woman named Sasha Rothschild. And it's the diary of Sasha at age 13, getting involved with all sorts of things, not just drinking, but starting to do coke, hanging out with gang members, real fun things. And what's weird is that we are a comedy show. We are a comedy show that also goes dark and serious when it needs to be. And so we're able to mine laughs and joy out of pretty uncomfortable situations. And there's no topic we're afraid of, but sometimes there is a story that just doesn't, I would not tackle a topic if it didn't also have the balance of humor in it. But we made a movie called Mortified Nation you can watch on Netflix. And one of the final story in the movie, in Mortified Nation, is a woman named Amber Jo, who was a teenager in the closet, and she had an abusive mother, and that's not funny. There's zero funny about that, just as there's zero funny about a 13-year-old doing cocaine. But she's a kid, and just like, I don't know if you've ever read Anne Frank's diary, but Anne Frank's in a pretty serious situation. We often think of her as a serious kid, but she's actually, Anne Frank's diary is hilarious. She's brilliant, and and these kids are the same. Like, we're all in our own little war zones, especially in adolescence. And so in this case with Amber Jo, with the abusive mom, she's observing her world, and this is a girl who she's in the closet, and has a crush on a waitress, but doesn't realize that it's a romantic thing. And so it's very, very funny and touching and heartwarming. But then there's moments where, mom comes in the picture, and you're scared, as you should be. And I think that's how real life is.
Right.
We silo comedy and drama in this really stupid way, in my opinion, with art. They're not separate. That real life works like a helix. All those things. Your saddest moments happen often with your funniest.
Yeah, that's so true. Well, and when I was thinking about our talk, I was thinking about how I would have, I don't have any diaries left from back then. I threw them all out many years ago.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, in a way, because it would be interesting to see that, But I never would have at that time thought about addiction, or, I was just like, oh, there's drugs, there's alcohol. All right, I'll have some.
Yeah.
And it just it it comes to mind that there's a lot of difference in the way that a teen would see themselves at that age than looking back on it.
Yeah. And for you, that was a teenage that began prior to age 18.
Yeah, it started at 12, right along with some trauma.
Right.
And then by the time I was in my mid 20s, I'd stopped.
Yeah. It's where I think I have an addictive personality in a lot of ways, and so uh, but I'm very fortunate enough to not have. Yeah, I feel like drugs and alcohol have been something that I've been able to sort of keep in their
Yeah.
place of like, and here's the limit kind of thing. Um,
Hmm.
and then there's certainly been times in my life where, at least with alcohol, where I couldn't, but I always think of addictions and everything as, certainly not limited to sobriety, and you know uh, and for me it's all mental health, and just sort of like our figuring out ways of dealing with our relationships to ourselves and being honest with ourselves, and that's something I have far more personal experience with.
Right, right. So, do you want to talk a little bit about that? Like, and what brought you into the narrative breath work in particular? Maybe we could kind of start to move into that.
Yeah, yeah, sure. um So, mortified comes from, in certain ways, a this thought that, I don't know, just the fun of like, oh, I had a childhood crush on some girl, and so I'm going to write a love letter and send it to her, which I never did, and because I never did, that led me to this bizarre career that I have. But really, underneath all of that is a thing about, like, I never gave it to her, partially due to fear and shame. And shame is a big um, undercurrent of what I do with Mortified. I mention this because it took me many years to realize it, but I realized that's not a coincidence. That's not just like, oh, I like that there's this after thing. Like, no, I've been on a mission. I firmly believe I've been on a mission to change people's relationship to shame, um, for all of my adult life. And that comes from my own relationship to my mother, which was physically abusive. It comes with my relationship to myself. I would not allow myself to have emotions for many years. It's like I was just very like, not a stoic person, because I think I've always been outgoing and sort of fun in certain ways, but like, um, but certainly would never cry. I mean, I didn't cry at all in my teenage years. And Anyway, it wound up being a very unhealthy thing, and it wound up at some point manifesting into depression, a pretty severe depression throughout my 20s, and I mean, still comes back. I'm 44 now, but that manifested eventually into things. There was suicidal ideations and obsessions, and um, uh, probably the most sort of strange symptom that I had with have I should say with mental health is tics. Um, which are is a I have adult onset tic disorder, which,
Hmm.
I will say tic disorders are a moving target of name. Like, I think that they're always changing how they classify things, and I don't even know if it's called that anymore. Tourette's, I know, is changing how they're calling things. But essentially, what people know of Tourette's or tics are typically what's made light of in movies. So you might have a character in a TV show like Seinfeld or something saying something super inappropriate at the wrong moment. And that's called coprolalia. And then you could have echolalia, which is when you're repeating things that people say. And so there's a bunch of different kinds of tics, and you can have motor tics, which is, like if I'm having spasms, and you can have vocal tics, and I wound up having both. And it started as gibberish, zzz, 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 just like things like that. And then it started becoming words, benign words like car or mom or cat or something like that, things that don't necessarily have connotations of emotion. And then it became phrases, and then the fourth iteration was negative phrases, like really dark thoughts about death. And it was sort of like it was like an album. It was about like 10 phrases typically, with a few like rotating singles that would come in and out, but of like 10 different phrases that I would just say, and they were not phrases that I felt. Like some of them, there were things about race, there were things about death, and they aren't necessarily, I think, a misconception people have about tics. Very often they'll have a scene in a movie where somebody with tics is standing next to an overweight person, and the person goes, up, you're fat, like they'll have like a tic like that. And while that kind of tic does exist, that's not me. Like I'm not my tics are not driven by my environment where I'm tempted to say something. But what's interesting that I learned is that my tics, going back to shame, so it all comes back. My tics are they are inspired. They are triggered by shame, thoughts of shame, and sometimes those can be like fairly mundane thoughts, like it could be like, oh gosh, I did I leave my keys on the table, right? So it's sort of regret, but regret's a version of shame. It could be something as simple as that, and then I might go, or some, or I'm not going to say it here, but like I would say some pretty inappropriate things. Or it would be a more severe thing, like, oh, I'm so embarrassed that I said this to Lynn on her video podcast or live, whatever this format is called, but because, oh my God, that's humiliating. And for years, I didn't tell anybody about this kind of stuff. And I decided, that's really unhealthy for me. I need to change my relationship to shame. And so I'm a warrior on that front through Mortify.
Right.
Narrative breathwork is a new extension of that for me that doesn't involve comedy so much. But yeah, and so.
Well, let's pause here and talk about thoughts and associations. So one thing I know, and you're a meditator as well, is we know that there's a lot of associations with thoughts. So you can have, I left my keys on the table, and then it's a memory of a time when you were a teenager and you lost your dad's car keys, or the mind just associates things.
Yeah.
So we have one thought and then another and another. We get into streams of thought. And then when we have trauma or experiences that are painful, where we feel powerless or shame, then the thoughts that come up are associated with feelings in our body as well. So it's the nervous system gets involved. And so one of the things that when I work with people, we go into the energy or sensations in the body, and we just kind of listen and see what are the associated thoughts. So I find it very interesting when you're talking about these words that come in. What's your experience with that in meditation? Like, do they calm down in meditation? Do they, or do they make any sense at all in terms of associations? Maybe.
Interesting. So, well, if I'm having a lot of tics, so the meditation I typically do would be breath work, which is a more active meditation. You're sort of, I can describe it later, but you're breathing in a very systematic way. You're actually doing something. And I do that often as a stress relief stress can be from tics. Yeah, I don't really have those thoughts or impulses during meditative experiences. But interestingly, when you're trying to meditate, one of the reasons I don't do traditional meditation as much, meaning traditional where you're like sitting, and I enjoy it when I do, but I find it very difficult, as everybody does, and it's because you have the radio waves coming in from your brain being like, oh, you're not doing anything right now, David. Well, this is a great time to tell you should remember to buy this at the store next. And oh, did you call this person? And right, and you're like, oh, wait, no, this is not the time to solve all that. So you do get those incoming thoughts, which are kind of like tics. They're these involuntary things. But yeah, they generally don't happen in that. My tics come about typically when I'm alone, which I guess meditation would be that. But when I'm alone with my thoughts in transit, so if I'm biking, walking, or driving in my car, and I have a shameful thought, shame it has a weirdly physical role in my body, and it manifests in me. It's not just a psychological thing for me. Most people with tics or Tourette's are not like that. I don't use the word Tourette's, by the way, because technically, by definition, Tourette's, as far as I understand, must be diagnosed or recognized clearly prior to the age of 18, which to me seems a completely arbitrary and silly distinction. But and almost any research data, support materials, support groups, money, anything for Tourette's is about 8-year-olds and 12-year-olds. There's zero. There's just fucking nothing for adults, and it makes me angry. But so everything you look up it's really actually not even for kids, it's for parents, which is necessary. But so for me, it's a pretty lonely thing. And then to not even get to call myself part of this tribe, that I'm part of this other tribe, that like no one knows what it is a little alienating. And weird tangent I went on, but true.
So the shame.
Yeah. You
feel that in your body.
Yeah.
As well. Yeah.
It physically manifests. And it's a in the case of tics, and I've since learned it is due to the whole thing is my relationship with my mother. The voices are voices of disapproval from her, and the human brain is just a weird place. And my mom was great in a lot of ways. She wasn't some monster. So, but she had this other side to her, and it had an impact. And for years I was embarrassed. Here's shame again. I'm not allowed to feel things because other people have it worse. Right? And I know a lot of people who deal with addiction, same thing. Like, oh, well, there's homeless people, or there's, I once saw a documentary about this person in Darfur. I'm not them, so I don't have the right to be sad for myself. It's like, well, that's insane.
Minimizing is a very common trauma response.
Yeah, it's unproductive.
Yeah. Not true.
I mean, it's good, I think, on some level to have that humility, but it's but it drives me crazy when I'm related to certain people even, and friends with certain people who will minimize other people's experiences because they're like, oh, first world problems and all that. I'm like, that's an awful thing to say to somebody.
Yeah.
Problems are problems.
It is.
If it's important to you, it's important. Right. So, but yeah.
So tell us about the breath work.
So breath work is something that I discovered years ago, um, and interestingly, it's like my dad. I think my dad was sick at the time. Both of my parents had passed away, and I was thinking about. It was like around the time of my mom's birthday, and so I was just like thinking about parents and like all that. And I discovered this thing, and I thought it sounded really dumb. I was like, I know how to breathe. Is this going to be like a yoga thing? And I was at a retreat. I was at a yoga retreat. I was like, I like yoga, but like, I don't need to learn how to breathe. That sounds boring. But I did this thing, and it's basically you breathe into I'll stand up a little bit. You breathe into your belly,
Mm-hmm.
and then you breathe into your chest, and then you breathe out of your mouth. So it's in, out. So that's a quick crash course, but you can learn breath work in about a minute. But I could explain more. But anyway, it's all through the mouth, not through the nose. There's all sorts of variations on it. But within about 2 minutes of doing this, my fingers got tingly, my lips got tingly, my jaw tightened up, and I start going into this real trippy place, this really hypnotic and beautiful, and like you're absolutely on drugs, but you're not on drugs. You don't, it's complete, which is why a lot of sober people, members of the sober community, like breath work, because it deals with control and your relationship to control and giving it up, just being like, nope, you're just going to let your body take over. And that's scary. And it deals with vulnerability. And also because my suspicion is you get high in a really safe way. And so you do that for about 30 minutes, typically, at least in the version that I do. And and so
in through your mouth.
What's that?
It's out of so you're breathing in through your mouth and out of your mouth?
Yeah, so it's belly, chest, boca, out of your mouth. So in, out, in, out. And it's just, I always say the elevator breath.
In is through your nostrils?
Nope, nothing through your nose, all through your mouth.
Okay.
So I probably described it too quickly, but I always describe it as the elevator of breath always goes up. It starts at your belly and goes up. So it's into your belly, into your chest, out of your mouth, into your belly, into your chest, out of your mouth. So it's like a big one into your belly, top it off with a little half breath on your chest. Yep. And you don't use a pillow. You just lay on the floor comfortably, but flat. Just create a passageway that's pretty pure, and a pillow will kind of cut off that passageway a little bit. Yeah. But it's really the reason I mentioned my parents prior to that is because in this experience, like I started connecting dots and seeing, like I was visited by, which is a very common thing. And whether you want to believe that's a ghost or a spirit, or whether you just want to believe it's your active imagination, that's up to you. I'm in the latter category, but I got to hear from people I loved and have lost and have issues with, and got to I had like major life epiphanies, and I had career epiphanies, and like my brain is a really noisy place, and breath work is not something that wipes my brain of thought. It does in moments, but what it does is it crystallizes thought for me and makes me just sort of see something in a tunnel that I'm not going to control. It's just going to take me where it needs to. And it's beautiful. And it changed my life. It's like I thought it just sounded stupid. It sounded boring. And a lot of people combine it with sound baths, which sound baths are a very, very trendy thing, and for good reason, because they're very relaxing. But
they're pretty cool, yeah.
What's that?
They're pretty cool, yeah.
Yeah, and then there's people like people like Wim Hof, who's European, German. I don't know what he is, but he does like breath work and like he does things that involve your breath in like ice, and there's there's a type of breath work where you do it for like an hour and a half. That does not sound like my cup of tea. It seems unnecessary and extreme. You're as it's been explained to me, although there is some debate on this, you are not hyperventilating yourself, but you are hyperoxygenating yourself because you are not depriving yourself of any air. You're essentially giving yourself too much, if anything, but
Right.
you get dizzy, which is why you're lying down. Well, it's a reason you're lying down. It is the only thing unsafe about breath work is that you within about 2 minutes, you go into an altered state. But I never overpromise with breath work.
So do you do it at a certain speed, or do you just like, everybody does it at a different speed?
So I prefer to do music with breath work. Not everybody does that. I prefer some people, when they do music, it's like Indian music and tribal music, and they go the whole holistic community thing. I'm not a big fan of doing that as much. I like playing beat-driven modern music that has, I select really songs that have some kind of lyrical relevance that might trigger thoughts in your brain, so you can kind of hear something encouraging or hear something reflective in a lyric, but you don't have to think about the song, but they're just little sparks to kind of make your memory go in different directions. And I mentioned music because it creates a metronome for breath, and you don't have to stick to that metronome, but it's helpful to have a guide. And then, some facilitators of breathwork gatherings lean back. Some are like way in your face. Some are very spiritual. Some are very motivational. I'm probably somewhere in the middle in terms of. I think I do speak. I'm one of the breathwork type of people who might like speak a little more than not saying anything. But I find it, and I'm constantly reminding people: belly, chest, out, belly, chest, out, belly, chest, out, all through your mouth, like all that kind of stuff. And I'll do that to the beat. They don't have to do that to the beat. I'll walk around the room and I'll see what rhythm some man or woman are at, and I'll place my hand on their stomach or chest and just give them a light tap to give them a rhythm. Because when you're in this state, you generally at some point will forget to breathe in this system, or you will forget what it is, because your brain, it's like you go into like a dream state. So you don't know where you are.
So can you describe, so you have workshops where you do this with people.
Yeah.
So what would that be like? Is it a couple hours or something, or what does that look
I've
like?
typically done I've typically been doing like a little, somewhere between an hour and a half kind of thing. But because I do Mortified, we start with some journaling. We talk about, I've done it where it's a group conversation, or I've done it where it's just about you, but I like to talk to people about their childhood, especially seemingly benign things from childhood. Like, I don't know, what's your first memory of a school dance, right? Or what was your favorite, what was the first album you bought, or first album you loved, if you loved one at all. And so things, I'm not going to ask you about like, tell me about your abuse, right? Because all of those, first of all, that's a really hard starting place. But second of all, it's nice to find, if I'm doing a group thing, like find things that everybody can connect on, that feel safe. But then when you ask somebody why, well, why did you like that song? Let's come up with 5 reasons. Well, the first reason I like that song was because, I don't know, it was a catchy beat, right? Oh, okay, you like that song because it's a catchy beat. Why else? Oh, well, actually, because the band dressed in a certain way, and I was tired of my friends, and I kind of wanted to look gothy. And well, why'd you want to look gothy? Well, because, and so you start hearing the engines of why you think the way you think, and all roads lead. It's all the same medicine. It all leads back to, core tenets of who we are. and our survival mechanisms and all that kind of stuff. And so we talk to people about that. The main thing I like to try to do, though, is, you know, a very popular thing to do in meditation and yoga and things of that nature is set an intention. You know, an instructor might say, "All right, everybody, I'd like you to set an intention. My name is Sky," and that's great. But I think it's sort of, it's arbitrary to just tell someone to set an intention. Like, what do you even mean? Like, so I like to give people parameters to set intentions. And the reason intention setting is good is because this is what I believe. Everything in life is storytelling. Everything is narrative. You talking to me today, there's narratives going on. People watching this are bringing their own life narratives to things. And intention setting is actually goal setting. And goal setting is what a protagonist does at the beginning of a story.
Right.
And a story is just a protagonist chasing a goal. And are they going to get it or not? Now, a story is far more complex beyond that, of course. But that's essentially, you're watching character they have to say, "I want the thing," and then they chase the thing. And in the process, other unexpected events may happen. And I think that day when I was doing breathwork, I think I was thinking, there was a woman next to me who had a jigsaw puzzle tattoo on the back of her neck. And right before I laid down, I saw this woman with a jigsaw puzzle tattoo, and I thought, wow, my mom loved jigsaw puzzles. And again, she was in my brain. And so when they said set an intention, I was like, I guess it would be nice to like hear from my mom. There's something about like hearing from my mom or whatever. And then we laid down and did this thing, and because I had kind of set this sort of narrative goal, it morphed completely during it. And I think I left even that goal, but it became, other things illuminated, and I realized, just how much everything was sort of connected.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm sorry, I think I got a little derailed, but hopefully there was something insightful in there.
Yeah, well, I think the intention is like, I was going to ask you, do you set like a topic or something like that, where you say,
Sometimes, yeah.
today we're going to look at that, your first album? Like, do you do that before the breathing, or is that something you would do?
Before. And I've tried and so I've tried techniques, like last Valentine's Day I did, I got brought in to do a woman's like social club, like some sort of network industry, female industry leader, social club for Valentine's Day. And so some of them are married and some of them are single. So we were talking about romance in general and love and what love means. And so we did a thing about, the theme was that, and we kind of, and I say, look, make of this experience what you want. If you need to think about something else, that's fine. But I'm going to give you a thing that you could explore. And then I kind of guide them and sort of try to do a bit of a Mad Lib style story where I let them tell it to themselves, but like, think about something that you want. Okay, now give it a totem. I want you to create an object for that totem. Maybe we're going to do this before the class. Like, I don't care what that totem is. It could be an action figure. It could be a paper cup. It could be a piece of jewelry that your grandma gave you, whatever it is that represents this thing that you want. And if the thing you want is marriage, if the thing you want is out of the marriage, whatever it is, like, I want you to give it an object. And so we start kind of making things more concrete and more narrative. And then when we go into the breath work, I start encouraging them to do things with that object. They can only half pay attention to me. So I'm only going to speak in short sentences, and I'm only going to speak every so often. And in between me speaking, they'll forget things and all that. So I'm kind of going to be there to be a bit of a rudder and guide them just enough. And if they want to do their own free form thing, they can ignore me, or they can just take somebody else's class. But I like doing this because there's really nobody doing it this way. Mm-hmm. And I think when you see your life as a story, you're able to help take control of the narratives you tell yourself. which we all live by narratives. I'm not good enough, or I am good, whatever it is, and we sometimes feel a little powerless from those narratives and forget that we're in control of them. And breathwork's a way of entering a dream state where you can reclaim some of that. I will say, not everybody has these sort of spiritual, powerful moments. And so my selling point with breathwork is usually, hey, are you stressed out? Here's a real simple way for you to get relaxation and calm. And because breathwork, my version of breathwork, not everybody's, but mine certainly culminates with a release. Like I would say about half the breathwork teachers end with like a giant group scream, which is why I can't do it in apartments very often. But it feels great to just scream and have permission to just let something out. And so at base minimum, if somebody is not an emotionally open person, I'm just like, look, this is just relaxing. This is like a massage or a spa, or just going to, or going out into a field. And, it's like sports, like you're just going to get some energy out, but you're going to do it in a very different kind of way than you're used to. But you might get something more out of it, and that's great.
When you're kind of bypassing the thinking mind, the cognitive mind. So that tendency people have to try and figure things out.
Yeah, like I said, I have a noisy brain. I have an overly overthinking brain, which is not me, which is good. It serves me in some ways, but it really does not serve me in a lot of ways. And I think a lot of us are like that. And I just try to turn off the goddamn tap. And so that's my goal a lot. And breath work is something that allows me to do that. And I think, but yeah, for people who don't like, who struggle with traditional meditation because, I don't know how to not think. Well, first of all, meditation is not about not thinking. It's not about having a blank mind, but it's about being present. And if you are thinking, oh, my butt hurts right now sitting like this, well, that's part of meditation. But don't think about, as best you can, the future, the past, and all these other things necessarily. Breathwork is active meditation, so it gives you a tool to focus on, which is your breath. In, out, in, out, belly, chest, out. And so it gives you this metronome. It's transcendental meditation, which I'm not super versed in, but from what I know of it, you have a mantra and you're repeating that mantra again and again and again. It's the same thing. So it's like you're given a thing to focus on that's just here and now. Weirdly, in focusing on your breath and all that in breath work, you might be visited by elements of your past or think about your future, but generally in a more focused, clear way where everything else goes away and it's just the thing. Just like when you're in a dream and everything's clear, but also like when in a dream, when breath work is over, those big epiphanies that you have, if you don't write them down in the first 30 seconds, that can happen.
Yeah, okay.
And sometimes it's kind of fine to be like, yeah, let them go. Who cares?
Yeah, they'll come back. So in meditation, when you talked about, we have a few moments of silence in our mind, which is not common. Most people have something going on all the time, something in their ears, some kind of podcast, some kind of, the radio, music, something's going on usually.
Yep.
And then, the mind might bring in something kind of benign, like don't forget to go to the store, but also the inner critic might come in. So if we tie this back to shame, and so the mind goes, oh yeah, I forgot. I haven't told you quite enough times yet today that you're an idiot, or whatever it might,
My mind says that a lot. My mind is saying that right now. I'm an idiot. But that inner critic, we all have really interesting relationships with ours. My inner critic often, like I said, manifests in a very physical way. And
Mhm.
back in my late 20s, when I was in the worst of depressions and I was hospitalized and all that, you know, um, I was hearing voices. So I was making sounds and hearing them as well.
Yeah.
And inner critics are an interesting thing, but sometimes it's interesting to try to not treat them as the enemy, which is a scary thought because
Mhm.
these voices don't really like us. But sometimes it's interesting to try to think of them as like, oh, that's nice. That's I see that you're like just patronize them a little, become their friend, but understand, you know, just like in real life with a real person, any terrible person is just acting that way out of their own baggage.
Right. And there's a reason why we have an inner critic. It often has something to do with protecting us, ironically.
Yeah,
Like if we're bullying ourselves into doing something to get approval, for instance, or being perfect about something. And it doesn't mean that it's functional,
sure.
but it means sometimes we can understand why it's there. Mhm.
This is making me think of a story a dear friend of mine shared with me once, named Sam, and the story is he told me this parable about the end of the world. It was a really dark conversation. He was actually telling me why he doesn't kill himself, and he said he wants to see the final act. And I was like, "What's the final act?" And this is a person who dealt with some pretty severe mental health issues. He was paranoid
Mhm.
schizophrenic, and but he said, "Well, I want to see the final act." I said, "Well, what happens in the final act?" And he told me like, "Well, there's the devil, and the devil's bought all these souls, but one man refuses, and the devil says, here, here's some money, here's power." And the man's like, no, I don't want it. He's like, yeah, but I want your soul. And the devil's like pleading and pleading, and the man keeps refusing, and the devil keeps upping the ante and upping the ante and offering, riches and everything you could possibly imagine. um and then what happens is at some point the man refuses, and the devil starts getting so worked up that he begins to cry. And in his tears, as he's breaking down, the man sees the shell of a devil kind of going, "Ah," and the man realizes that the reason the devil has been buying all these souls isn't because the devil is evil or even hates him, but because the devil is lonely. And when we talk about inner critics, and that there might be this other side to them, and you might just be able to put them in their place and be like, oh, that's nice, like I know you hate me and you think I'm a piece of shit human being and that I should jump off a cliff or whatever. You can pat that voice on its head sometimes and be like, but right now we're going to go eat some ice cream, and if you're not cool with that, that's fine, but I'm going to go do that. Talk to them like a little bit like a child, because that's what they
Right.
are. And
Mhm.
maybe they're not always right, and just maybe. And so it's kind of, they're battling their own little demons. And so in a lot of ways they might be like the devil,
Hmm.
at least that version of the devil.
Right, right.
They're just lonely. Maybe they just want your company. And I'm being totally serious,
Yeah, I get that
as someone
completely.
who lived with voices for years, like,
Mhm.
you know
So do you think that the
maybe
breath
treat them like they do exist, and
right.
don't just keep rebuffing like they're evil or that they're imaginary. Like, deal with them and just like put them in a place.
Yeah,
That
yeah,
was an effective tool for me.
right. So what do you think the effect of this breath work is on your depression? Or do
When I
you
get really depressed, I need to exercise. I'm not somebody who believes heavily in the powers of medication in the pharmaceutical industry for depression. I think it has its time and place, but it is those medications also create anxiety attacks and can increase the depression. And doctors do a terrible job of telling you that. And
mm,
and they give out the medication freely. So my depression thing is it's nutrition and
Hmm.
exercise. It's keeping yourself healthy. And when I get depressed, I'm like, well, am I doing those things? And it's usually like, no, I'm eating a lot of Doritos and I'm not working out.
Right.
And breath work is a very easy thing for me to do, where I could just do a class or something and you know, release something. You know, it's processing something. It's telling your body a story. It's taking
Mhm.
something in and transforming it when it comes out. You know, whether you want to get into the physical thing of or the chemical thing of its oxygen into.
Do you think that it's helpful in releasing shame out of your body?
Yeah, that's what I'm doing.
Yeah.
I'm releasing stress, I'm releasing energy, I'm releasing shame. But I also do that by writing. I do that by having a conversation with a total stranger like you
Mhm.
and and whoever is watching. I can't see whoever the heck is watching.
Yeah.
Maybe there's 5 people, maybe there's 500,000 people. I am
Mhm.
bearing something that's pretty scary about myself. To me, it's scary.
Mhm.
Just a bunch of strangers.
Mhm.
That's how I change the relationship to shame. Like I'm patting shame on the head
Right.
and just being like, "That's nice. You think I'm a worthless whatever, but like you can you go over here now, and I'm gonna I'm gonna not let you blackmail me, and so I'm gonna talk. I'm gonna out myself
Mhm.
because it's like, why am I? Why would I be embarrassed? It used to be.
Mhm.
I used to have so much shame about shame. Like I had like layers and layers upon shame about shame about shame. Um, and I don't think shame is an inherently bad thing. Some shame is good. I wish our president had more of it, but there's a lot of. I think that our relationship to shame has to change in this culture,
Uh,
and that we have to reduce it drastically. But but it's not so much about eradicating it. I used to think that. Now I think no, it's just about changing your relationship to shame and just owning it enough. You know, everyone you see on reality TV who you enjoy watching but don't want to be friends with in real life, like those people should have some shame in their life because that would help balance them. And um, you know, shame plays a positive role in
mhm.
our lives, but at the moment it plays too strong of a role in our lives in a negative way, in all of our lives.
Right. Right. And talking about it honestly, and what you do with mortified as well, and that's such a powerful way to work with shame. I think at
Yeah,
some point we have to be able to know ourselves and be on our own side.
yeah.
And
I had no idea. I just thought I was doing a dumb comedy show. I mean,
right.
I knew it had humanistic qualities, but like I didn't know I was doing it to address my own demons and my own things. And there's a line that we say at the end of at the end of our movie, at the end of our TV show, and at the end of our podcast and stage shows. And it's what have we learned tonight after we hear a bunch of people having bared their souls. And it's the one unfunny moment of the show, or hopefully the one unfunny moment of the show. And it's we end the show with we learn that we're freaks and we're fragile and we all survive. And I wrote that line years ago. I just said it on stage because I had to. Like it just had to come out. It felt right. And to
Mm.
me, it's a line that I have said in my darkest moments when nobody knows I'm having a dark moment and I'm on stage. I'm saying that to keep myself alive.
Right.
And that's my mantra. You know, we've had sometimes people criticize it saying like, well, what about the people who didn't survive between the suicide as teenagers or and my answer would be, I wish they heard it. I wish they heard lots of things.
Mhm.
Maybe it would have. I don't know. I can't say that it would have made a difference. But this is not a message for the people who are already gone. I'm talking to you because you are here now, and I want us to know that whatever has happened, you have already past tense. Not you can survive. You have already done it. And I get very passionate about that. And sometimes I get emotional about that. And but it's important for me.
And I'm sure you have changed a lot of people's lives through your work and your comedy.
Hopefully,
Yeah.
that's the point of art, is to, you know, maybe not make a drastic change in somebody's life, but certainly make them think about something
hmm
in a little bit of a different way. Even if that's like, oh, I hate that guy, but it leads them to some better epiphany that, where they
Right.
think I'm an idiot. But
So your podcast Mortified. So let's tell people again how they can get in touch with you. They
you
can
can
listen to
you can
Mortified.
check out Mortified at getmortified.com. Once you're on getmortified.com, you can find out how to participate. We are in multiple cities around the world. Watch us on Netflix or you can hear the podcast on getmortified.com. And then nowhere on getmortified.com does it ever mention anything about narrative breathwork. So that you would just have to Google or just type in narrative breathwork or Dave Nadelberg breathwork, and hope to find that. But narrativebreathwork.com, it's my semi-secret other life is what I like to call
Right. Right. Well, that's amazing. Well, thank you so much. I love this different perspective. It's not something that most people would necessarily link with recovery and addiction. And yet it really has a lot to do with it, especially shame. The
it.
shame
Sure.
that drives us into addiction and the shame of addiction. And I love the work that you're doing. So thanks very much for being here.
Thank you. And I like the mission that you guys are on to help people recover from whatever that hardship or trauma is, because I think we're all in recovery throughout our lives, and that's an
hmm
okay thing.
hmm And the last, even 5 years with people like Gabor Mate talking about the trauma that underlies addiction. And, at the Kiloby Center, they work first with trauma, because if you don't address the trauma, you're not going to be able to really heal the addiction. And so I just think it's such an exciting time right now. There's so many somatic experiencing, all of these different somatic ways that we work with the trauma that's in our body and the shame that's in our
Yeah.
body. So I think it's an exciting time to be in recovery and to know all of these things are here for us. Mhm.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much for bringing me on, and I look forward. When's this going to be out?
So it'll be January 10th to 20th, or 10th to 19th, actually. So but I'll email you a few times in between there and then.
If you want, it sounded like you make some edits. If you want, like, we could give you video clips, or like you could put the trailer to Mortified. I don't have video clips of breath work, but I mean, there are photos you can steal from my website if you want to have
I
things.
could do that definitely, and I will, yeah.
But
if you
definitely, we have a trailer to the Mortified Guide, which is our TV show or something.
Sure, that would be great to do.
You can steal whatever you want.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Yeah, just send them and I'd be happy to do that.
Yeah.
Yeah. People love seeing that too. Yeah. Yeah. Cool. Well, and have fun in Italy. That sounds awesome. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, thanks again, David. It was really nice to meet you.
All right. Bye.
All right. All right. Bye. Hello, this is Lynn Fraser with the Kiloby Center Radical Recovery Summit. We are so excited to bring you the lineup for January 10th to 19th, 2020. Go to radicalrecoverysummit.com to see the new headliners for 2020 and to sign up. You can watch free January 10th to 19th or buy an all-access pass.